Last night, in pockets of southern England stretched across the hottest bank holiday weekend in over a century of May records, something happened that had never happened in this country in this month before. The temperature did not fall below 20 degrees Celsius. Not at midnight, not at 2 a.m., not at 4 a.m., the coldest hour before dawn, when every instinct of the British climate should have been pulling warmth out of the air and offering the land some relief from the extraordinary heat of the day. The thermometers stayed where they were, locked above that threshold, measuring a night that belonged to a different latitude and a different season. The Met Office confirmed it on the morning of the 25th of May 2026 in a tweet that stopped the weather community in its tracks. The UK had recorded its first ever tropical night in the month of May. And what that means for human health, for sleep, for the body's ability to survive extreme heat, and for the long-term trajectory of the British climate is something that every person in this country needs to understand. The term tropical night has a precise meteorological definition. It refers to a 24-hour period in which the overnight minimum temperature fails to drop below 20 degrees Celsius at any point. It is not a casual label or a journalistic flourish designed to make a weather forecast sound more dramatic. It is a technical classification used by meteorologists around the world to identify nights when the atmosphere has retained enough heat to prevent the sea ice cooling that a temperate climate normally delivers after sunset. In the tropics, where this phenomenon is common and expected, the human body and the built environment have adapted over generations to deal with it. Houses are designed for airflow, not insulation. Cultural routines account for the fact that night provides no thermal escape from the heat of the day. But in the United Kingdom, a country where the entire built environment, from the architecture of Victorian terraces to the insulation standards of post-war social housing, was designed around a climate that reliably cools overnight, a tropical night represents a collision between a changing atmosphere and an infrastructure that was never built to cope with it. What happened across parts of southeast England on the night of the 24th of May 2026 is the direct result of the same African plume that drove daytime temperatures to record levels during the bank holiday weekend. The plume brought not just heat, but a particular quality of air. The air mass that arrived over southern England from the Sahara via the Mediterranean carried what meteorologists describe as a high specific humidity, a density of water vapor elevated significantly above the typical May average for the British Isles. That moisture content matters enormously for what happens to temperatures after dark. In a dry air mass, the ground radiates its stored daytime heat rapidly back into the atmosphere after sunset, and temperatures fall relatively quickly. In a moist air mass, water vapor acts as a blanket, absorbing and re-emitting the outgoing long-wave radiation from the surface and slowing the rate of cooling. The more moisture in the air, the slower the overnight temperature fall. In the night of the 24th to 25th of May, that blanket was thick enough to hold the temperature above 20 degrees until dawn, and in some locations, to keep it above 22 degrees through the entire night. The Met Office confirmed the record in clear terms. Overnight, minimum temperature records for May could be broken, with temperatures failing to fall below 20 degrees in a few spots. That confirmation, measured and technically precise, describes a phenomenon that is uncommon even in midsummer, let alone in late May. Senior meteorologist Tom Morgan was explicit. The temperatures were exceptional, and the fact that it was happening in May was the detail that set this event apart from even the most intense summer heat waves Britain has experienced in recent years. The Met Office's own tweet on the morning of the 25th of May captured the significance in a single sentence. Temperatures may not fall below 20 degrees Celsius in a few spots. This is known as a tropical night, uncommon in midsummer, let alone May. To understand why that matters so much, you have to understand what the body actually needs from the night during a heat wave, and why overnight cooling is not a comfort preference, but a physiological necessity. The human body is extraordinarily precise in its management of core temperature. Under normal conditions, the body's core temperature follows a circadian rhythm, falling slightly during sleep, which triggers and maintains the deeper stages of rest that are essential for cellular repair, immune function, hormonal regulation, and cognitive recovery. That overnight drop in core temperature is driven partly by behavioral factors like sleep itself, and partly by the ambient environment. When the bedroom is warm, the body loses less heat to its surroundings, and the natural overnight drop in core temperature becomes harder to achieve. When the bedroom is hot, the body actively increases blood flow to the skin and accelerates sweating in an attempt to shed heat into the environment. This process depletes water, raises heart rate, disrupts sleep architecture, and, if sustained for long enough, begins to compromise the body's ability to manage its own temperature the following day. A tropical night is particularly dangerous for this reason. It does not just make sleep uncomfortable, it removes the body's most important mechanism for recovering from a hot day, which is the cool, recuperative night. After 12 or 14 hours of heat exposure during the day, cardiovascular strain, dehydration, and core temperature elevation have all been building. A cool night allows these to reverse. A tropical night does not. The cardiovascular stress continues. The dehydration deepens as the body keeps sweating overnight. The immune system, which performs its most active repair work during deep sleep, is disrupted by the fragmented, shallow sleep that high ambient temperatures produce. By the time the next hot day arrives, the body is not beginning from a recovered baseline. It is beginning from a position of accumulated physiological debt, and each consecutive tropical night adds to that debt. The 4 stages of sleep that the brain cycles through during a typical night have their own thermal requirements, and understanding them reveals why a tropical night is so much more than a minor inconvenience. Slow wave sleep, which is the deepest and most restorative stage, occurs predominantly in the first half of the night and is associated with H, the lowest core body temperatures of the sleep cycle. It is during this stage that the brain consolidates memories, the body releases growth hormone, and the immune system conducts its most active repair work. When ambient temperatures are high, slow wave sleep is the first to be disrupted. The brain cannot achieve the necessary depth of rest because the body is working too hard to shed heat. What replaces it is lighter, fragmented sleep, more easily interrupted, less restorative, and associated with elevated cortisol levels. REM sleep, essential for emotional processing and psychological recovery, is similarly compressed when heat is sustained overnight. A person who sleeps for 8 hours in a tropical night may complete only 3 or 4 proper sleep cycles instead of the 5 or 6 a cooler night would allow, leaving them functionally sleep deprived despite the full duration. That functional sleep deprivation is cumulative. Each tropical night adds to it, and by the 2nd or 3rd consecutive hot night, cognitive performance, emotional regulation, and reaction times are all measurably impaired even in healthy adults. Research published in August 2025 in the journal Environment International, drawing on data from 178 locations across multiple countries, found that hot nights are independently and significantly associated with increased mortality, entirely separately from the effect of hot days. The elevated temperature at night, the study found, exacerbates heat-related risks, not only by prolonging thermal stress, but also by depriving the human body of essential nocturnal rest. A national survey conducted in the UK found that 52% of people struggle to sleep during hot weather, a figure that underscores how widespread the sleep disruption associated with high overnight temperatures already is before the country enters the territory of genuine tropical nights. Scientists at Imperial College, London's Institute of Global Health Innovation, published findings in 2025 confirming that high nighttime temperatures suppress the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for the body's calm and recovery state, leaving individuals more vulnerable to stress and less able to recover physiologically. Poor sleep caused by heat was found to have a direct negative effect on mental health, linked to elevated anxiety, irritability, impaired cognitive performance, and worsening of existing psychiatric conditions. For older adults, the risks associated with tropical nights are disproportionately severe, and the scientific literature on this point is both extensive and alarming. Heat waves are frequently described in public health circles as the silent killer, and it is specifically sustained nighttime temperatures that make them lethal for the elderly in a way that daytime temperatures alone often do not. As people age, the autonomic mechanisms that regulate core temperature become less responsive. The ability to sense heat and trigger sweating is reduced. The cardiovascular reserve that allows a younger person to increase blood flow to the skin as a cooling mechanism is diminished. The sensation of thirst becomes less reliable, which means older people are less likely to drink enough fluid to replace what they are losing through overnight sweating. When the night provides no relief from the heat, this population has no window during which their compromised thermoregulatory systems can catch up. The mortality risk accumulates invisibly in care homes and in the homes of people living alone, in rooms without air conditioning, and without anyone to check that the window is open or the water glass is full. The Met Office's own attribution research published in 2025 quantified the role of climate change in driving the UK's tropical nights with a precision that removes any ambiguity about the trend. In the pre-industrial climate, the probability of experiencing 3 consecutive tropical nights in July in the UK was less than 1% per year. In today's climate, that probability has risen to approximately 20% per year. What was a near impossibility before the industrial age is now a 1 in 5 chance every July. And the May 2026 tropical night sits entirely outside the historical envelope that those July figures describe. The Met Office's Nicola Maxey has stated without qualification that with climate change and a warming climate, the UK will see more tropical nights. There is no doubt about that. Heat waves are more likely, and so as well as more days, we are going to see warmer nights. The trend is not speculative. It is already visible in the data accumulated since 1991. 3 consecutive tropical nights were recorded in July 2022 during the same heat wave that produced the UK's all-time temperature record of 40.3 degrees Celsius. Tropical nights were recorded in September 2023, a month in which they had previously been considered essentially impossible. And now, in May 2026, the first tropical night in the meteorological record for that month has been registered. Every time a new month is added to the list, the window of the British H climate year in which tropical nights can occur expands. The climate envelope is not simply becoming more extreme at its edges. It is becoming more extreme throughout. It is also important to be specific about which population groups face risks beyond the elderly, because public health messaging around heat waves sometimes gives the impression that only older people are at genuine risk, which is both inaccurate and potentially dangerous. Young children face heat regulation challenges that are comparable to those of the elderly, because infants and young children have a higher surface area to body mass ratio than adults, increases their rate of heat gain from the environment, and reduces their capacity to maintain a stable core temperature through sweating and vasodilation. A child who sleeps in a room where the temperature remains above 24 or 25 degrees Celsius overnight will experience disrupted sleep, increased heart rate, and elevated cortisol in ways that are physiologically similar to those observed in elderly adults. Pregnant women represent another high-risk group during tropical nights. Pregnancy raises the body's baseline metabolic rate and core temperature, and the additional circulatory demands of pregnancy reduce the reserve capacity available for thermoregulation under heat stress. Elevated overnight temperatures during pregnancy have been linked in epidemiological research to increased risk of preterm labor, reduced fetal growth and stillbirth, risks that intensify with each degree of sustained overnight warming above what the body can comfortably manage. People taking certain medications, including diuretics for blood pressure, antihistamines for allergies, and some antipsychotic medications, face additional vulnerability because these drugs can impair sweating, reduce fluid retention, or alter the cardiovascular response to heat in ways that make the body's normal heat management less effective. During a tropical night, the absence of any external cooling from the environment means these pharmaceutical vulnerabilities operate without any natural compensating mechanism. The urban heat island effect is a critical factor in understanding why tropical nights are experienced so much more intensely in London and other large British cities than in the surrounding countryside, and why the health implications for the millions of people living in high-density urban areas are disproportionately serious. Urban surfaces, which include concrete, tarmac, brick, and steel, absorb significantly more solar radiation than vegetated rural land, and they release that stored heat slowly throughout the night, rather than radiating it rapidly away after sunset. Green spaces, trees, and moist soil cool efficiently after dark. The built environment of a dense city does not. During the July 2022 heat wave, London's overnight temperatures were consistently running 4 to 5 degrees Celsius above those measured at rural stations in the surrounding home counties. What registered as a warm but not technically tropical night in a Hertfordshire village was a full-blown tropical night in Brixton or Hackney or Tower Hamlets. Now, the same pattern is playing out this bank holiday weekend. Parts of London with the lowest green space coverage and the highest population density are experiencing the most extreme overnight temperatures, and they are also home to some of the most socially deprived and medically vulnerable populations in the country. The inequality dimension of tropical nights in a country like the United Kingdom deserves direct attention rather than being folded into generalities about vulnerable populations. Access to air conditioning in the UK is significantly lower than in comparable European countries that experience higher average summer temperatures. A 2024 study estimated that fewer than 5% of UK homes have any form of fixed air conditioning, compared to over 30% in Spain and over 90% in the United States. Among social housing and privately rented homes in deprived urban areas, which are the very areas most affected by the urban heat island effect, the figure is still lower. The people who are most exposed to the health consequences of a tropical night in Britain, those in flats above ground floor with no through ventilation, those in densely packed terrace streets with no garden or outdoor space, those who cannot afford to buy fans or to run them overnight, those who rely on public transport and cannot easily travel to cooler environments, are also the people least likely to have the financial or practical resources to manage the heat. The tropical night that affected southern England on the 24th of May 2026 was not an equal experience. For some people, it was an uncomfortable night that produced a tired morning. For others, particularly older adults living alone in overheated social housing, it represented an accumulation of physiological stress without any mechanism for relief. The practical guidance for surviving a tropical night in the UK is straightforward in principle, but not always easy to execute, in a country whose housing stock was built for warmth retention rather than heat escape. The core principle is to manage the temperature of the sleeping environment, which means keeping windows closed and curtains drawn during the day to prevent solar heating of the indoor space, and opening windows only after outdoor temperatures begin to drop below indoor temperatures in the evening. In a tropical night, that crossover may not happen until very late, or may not happen at all if outdoor temperatures remain above indoor temperatures through the night. A cool shower before bedtime reduces core temperature and allows the body to begin the sleep process in a better thermal state. Light, loose bedding, and minimal nightwear reduce the insulation around the body that would trap heat. Keeping a glass of water by the bed and drinking before rising addresses the dehydration that accumulates during overnight sweating. A fan in the bedroom, ideally pointed toward an open window to create airflow rather than simply circulating warm air, provides meaningful cooling without the energy consumption and noise of air conditioning. For care homes, hospitals, and residential settings, housing vulnerable people, the requirements are more demanding. The UKHSA guidance during amber heat health alerts, which remain in place through the bank holiday weekend, requires health and social care providers to ensure that indoor temperatures in clinical and care settings do not exceed the threshold at which clinical risk increases, a threshold that is typically cited as 26 degrees Celsius for sleeping areas. In a tropical night, maintaining temperatures at that level without active cooling systems requires rigorous management of window and blind schedules, cold water provision, and increased monitoring of residents for signs of heat stress. The UKHSA has been explicit that an amber heat alert means the entire health service is expected to be affected, not merely the most vulnerable individuals. That is the level of system-wide mobilization that this bank holiday tropical night has triggered. Dr. Gillian Kay, a senior scientist at the Met Office who published a major report on UK heat extremes in 2025, made a statement that sits at the center of this entire story. She said that the chance of exceeding 40 degrees Celsius in the UK has been rapidly increasing, and that it is now more than 20 times more likely than it was in the 1960s. She added that temperatures several degrees higher than those recorded in July 2022 are possible in today's climate, and that the UK has a 50-50 chance of seeing a 40-degree day again within the next 12 years. The first tropical night in May is part of the same story that Dr. Kay is describing. Each of these milestones, the first 40-degree day, the 3 consecutive tropical nights in July, the first tropical night in September, and now the first tropical night in May, is a data point in a trend that is not going to reverse. The atmosphere is not going to cool down again on its own. The trajectory runs one way, and the UK's climate record is documenting it milestone by milestone. The significance of what happened overnight in southern England on the 24th of May 2026 will not be apparent to most of the people who lived through it. They will know that they slept badly and woke up feeling exhausted in a room that felt airless and oppressive. They will know that the heat that greeted them when they opened their eyes felt different from ordinary morning warmth, heavier and more accumulated. What they may not know is that they have just been part of a first, a meteorological milestone that no May in British history has ever produced before. The UK has recorded a tropical night in May. The climate that was promised by decades of scientific warnings has arrived, not only in the dramatic peak temperatures of the hottest afternoon, but in the quieter, more intimate, and more medically significant reality of a night that refused to cool down.